Okay, now we're going to look at questions 6 to questions 10. Question 6 asks, which of the following would be regarded as a supply-side shock for the UK economy? So we're looking at something that just affects supply. A, an economic downturn in the US economy affecting exports. It won't be that because that will affect AD. B, a rise in interest rates discouraging borrowing. Won't be that because that again affects AD. Rise in oil and gas prices increasing the cost of UK firms. This is the answer. Because if something's increasing the cost of UK firms will be less willing to supply the goods. So that means that SRAS will shift to the left. And it's not D either. Question 7 asks, the diagram below shows the aggregate demand, short-run aggregate supply, and long-run aggregate supply curves for the economy. The economy's initial equilibrium is at point E. Which one of the following developments affecting the economy is most likely to account for the movement in the macroeconomic equilibrium from E to F? So from moving from E to F, SRAS is shifting to the left, which means that firms are less willing to supply the goods, and LRAS is also shifting to the left. So which one of these options down here causes that? An increase in labour productivity and the wage rate. If there was an increase in labour productivity, it would mean that our economy is able to produce more. That would mean that the LRAS curve will shift outwards because we can now produce more than we did before. So it's not going to be that one. B, a decrease in the underlying trend rate of economic growth and an increase in world commodity prices. If there was a decrease in the underlying trend rate of economic growth, let's say that the trend rate of economic growth was 5% and now our growth rate is 3%, rather than our economy moving to this point, where it is 5% above Y1, we're actually just moving to this point. So as in our LRAS will still be shifting outwards, but just not to the same extent it was before. But that's not the case because we're actually shifting inwards. So it's not going to be that one. A decrease in government expenditure and an increase in direct taxation. If there was a decrease in government expenditure, then that would affect AD. And AD here is constant, so it won't be that one either, which means it must be D, which we'll just check. D is a fall in the productivity and an increase in world commodity prices. The fall in productivity would affect the long run, and in the long run, we can produce less than we did before, so that would be correct. And an increase in world commodity prices would mean that it's more expensive for firms to produce the goods, which means that they're less willing to supply the goods, which means that the SRAS will shift to the left, which it does, which means that the answer to this question must be D. So now we move on to question 8. Question 8 asks, a country has a slow rate of growth of productivity and rise in cyclical unemployment. All other things being equal, which measures are most likely to increase the rate of growth of productivity and reduce cyclical unemployment? Is it A, an increase in investment and increased savings? B, more government expenditure on training and higher exchange rate? C, a decrease in payments and a lower budget deficit? Or D, lower taxations on businesses and lower interest rates? So we know that there is a low productivity. That's the first one to look at. And there's cyclical unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is caused by the business cycle. So we may have gone into a downturn or a bust, and there's just unemployment because there's a lack of demand in the economy. So you want something to address the lack of demand, the cyclical unemployment, and we want something to also address the productivity. Because really you want a high productivity growth rate, because then the economy can produce more and then you're better off as a whole. So if there was increase in investment, that would mean that productivity would increase. So that would be good. But if there was an increase in savings, then what would happen is AD would shift to the left. So we've already got cyclical unemployment, and we'll get more unemployment because, I just draw it here, our AD curve would shift even further to the left. So this would be real output, and this would be the price level, so just denote that as PL. Therefore, it will not be that one. More government expenditure on training, which would increase productivity, and a higher exchange rate. AD, remember, is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. If we had a higher exchange rate, it would mean that imports would now become relatively cheaper, which would mean that imports would increase. Also, our exports will now be relatively more expensive, which means that our exports would decrease. So actually that would cause the same. AD would shift to the left, which will cause more unemployment, because remember, labour is derived for the demand of the final good. So it's not going to be B. Decrease in benefit payments and lower budget deficit. Well, it's cyclical unemployment. It's not lazy unemployment or something like that. They're not choosing to not work. It's just that there's no jobs there. So that won't have an effect. So it must be D. We'll just double check this. Lower taxation on businesses. That means that businesses will invest more, demand more labour, produce more. So that would cause the SRAS to fall down. That's the supply side policy. And lower interest rates in general, which would cause consumers to save less or borrow, which would increase AD. Firms would also invest more because it's cheaper to borrow money. So that would cause our economy to produce more, which will get rid of the cyclical issues. So it would move maybe into a growth phase. So that would address that. And the productivity, because there's lower interest rates, could come from investment. So the best answer for that one is D. Okay. So now we've got question 9. The diagram below shows the actual level of real GDP and the trend level of real GDP over time for an economy. Between the points P and Q, which one of the following is most likely to be correct? So we've got real GDP here, mapped out against the time. And this is the trend rate. So we'd expect our economy to grow at this rate. But it doesn't actually happen because it fluctuates like it does. So A says the actual rate of economic growth is rising, while the level of unemployment is falling. So we're at point P and Q. And from moving from P to Q, our real GDP is rising. So we've got a growth rate. And as we've just come from this downturn and we're turning upwards, the gradient of this curve is getting steeper and steeper, which means that our growth rate of our economy is rising. And as our growth rate is rising, there's going to be less cyclical unemployment. So that would mean that unemployment will be falling. So the answer to this one will be A. I'll just go through why the other ones are wrong. The actual rate of economic growth is negative. That would be represented by this part, when this part's going down, when the curve's going down, because it means that real GDP is falling. So it's not going to be that one. The trend rate of economic growth is rising while the balance of payments on current account is deteriorating. You can't say anything about balance of payments from here, so I won't say that. The trend rate of economic growth and the output gap are both positive. We can't really tell if our economy has got an output gap or not because we don't know how much it could produce. It could be the case that everything was destroyed in an earthquake or something like that, so our whole economy is not able to produce as much as it could before. So we can't really say about output gaps here. So we'll just get rid of that one. Okay, so now we move on to question 10. Question 10 says that structural unemployment is most likely to be caused by A, a change in the pattern of demand, B, a fall in the exchange rate, C, a fall in unemployment benefits, D, an increase in interest rates. Structural unemployment is where there's mass unemployment in one industry in the economy. So one industry maybe declines, so the employment in that industry rises. So we're looking for something that will cause the unemployment in one industry to rise. So A is a change in the pattern of demand. This would be it. If consumers decided that they didn't want to buy UK cars anymore, then the UK car industry would fall. And then if it falls and declines, it may shut down. And there's loads of people that will be employed in this car industry that have skills specific to the car industry, and they may not be transferable to other industries. So that would mean that there would be structural unemployment. So that would be the case. If there was a fall in the exchange rate, that would just change how cheap your goods are relatively to other countries, like how cheap, expensive they are. So that wouldn't really cause that. A fall in unemployment benefits, again, wouldn't, because the industry's declined and there's just a mismatch of skills. It's not like they're choosing not to take the job. An increase in interest rates, that wouldn't have an effect either. So the only answer to this one will be A, because it causes one sector of the economy to fall.